Welcome to the Healthy Human Revolution podcast. I'm Dr. Laurie Marbas, and today I'm so honored to have Gregg Segal with us. How are you today, sir?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. No, thank you for coming. And well, let me just give a little intro, and then I'm going to ask you some amazing questions about this project that you had. You are a photographer, trained in California and some other things, but you have education background and dramatic writing. And your book called The Daily Bread, which is, I'll let you explain the project, really caught my eye. And I think it'll really be of an interest to the audience that we serve here. So can you tell us a little bit about the project and what was your motivation?
Yeah, well, a few years ago, I did a project called 7 Days of Garbage. And I asked family and friends and neighbors and anyone I could convince to save their garbage for 1 week and then lie down and be photographed in it. The idea was, of course, to bring our collective attention onto what we use and throw away. And I was really struck by the amount of packaging, of food packaging in our waste. And I started to think, well, how is this revolution in the way that food is produced and consumed? How is that impacting our diets? And so I thought it might be useful sorry about that beeping sound.
It's okay.
So I thought it would be useful to look more closely at diet, because I think it's only been in the last generation or two that we've become completely dependent on the industries of eating and cooking, and as a result, we sort of have lost focus or lost track of what it is that we're eating. We don't really think about what we're eating so much because often we're not the ones making our food, right?
Right, absolutely.
So I thought, well, why don't I kind of do this project to bring our focus back onto food in a meaningful way, which will allow us to take control of our diets. And I thought, what if I asked people to keep a journal of everything that they ate and drank for 1 week? And I decided to focus on kids because eating habits form when we're young, and they last a lifetime. So if you don't get it right by the time you're 9 or 10 years old, it's much more difficult, I think, to adapt and change as you get older.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just started with my son, who is now 12. He's kind of my guinea pig for projects that I do. And I photographed Hank and then friends of his from school. And I gradually expanded to other neighborhoods in Los Angeles. And it sort of quickly became clear to me that the story I wanted to tell about diet was, at least in part, about how globalization has impacted diet all over the world. And so I did a Kickstarter, which raised enough money to get me to India and Malaysia. And I came back from there with a body of work that I shared with Time Magazine and Geo Magazine in Germany, and they were excited about getting involved, and they helped fund shoots in Germany and Africa. So it could have just expanded exponentially, and I shot in Europe and Africa, and then I went to Brazil and the Middle East as well.
Absolutely.
So I would love to have gone to more places, but it was just expensive as you can imagine.
That's an enormous project, because I was reading on some of the other articles that you've done about you had to be 13 feet above the subject, or at least the ceiling feet.
The camera is attached to a pole that is suspended by 2 big light stands.
Wow.
And that camera is directly overhead of the subject. Okay. And the reason for that is it gives you a kind of clear bird's eye perspective that shows clearly what you're eating. And I think it registers more clearly with people when they see a week's worth of food,
right,
all in one photograph.
It reminds me, there was, I can't recall who did it, but there were photographs of entire families and what they ate.
Yeah, those pictures, I think that was Peter Menzel.
Okay.
And that's something that I became aware of in the process of doing this project. Everyone mentions that project. It's kind of a
absolutely
body of work. And I think that's a terrific piece as well. My only grievance with it was that it wasn't aesthetically that interesting, because it was just sort of the family standing there and the food there. I mean, as sociology, it's great.
Right.
Anyway,
well,
so
that's what I liked about your pictures, right? Because exactly, they appealed to the eye and it drew you in. I think also not only just the food, but the character of the child.
Right. Well,
And
that's the idea,
it
is
was
to
fun.
draw you in on an aesthetic level. And then once you're engaged, to kind of get you to think more deeply about the content of the pictures and diet specifically.
Interesting. Yeah, that was fascinating because I found another quote you had mentioned, we've outsourced the most vital ingredient and you called it the connective tissue of family and culture, which
Right.
is so very true. And I was curious, was there one child or one country that really stood out to you and changed you or had an impact on your own life?
Well, there are a number of lessons that I took away from the project. One of them being that it's surprisingly, to me anyway, not always the rich people who are eating the best, most nutritious foods. It's sometimes poor people.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was in India, I found one girl in particular whose father earned less than $5 a day, and yet, the girl was eating a pretty wholesome diet of okra and cauliflower curries, and lentils, which are very nutritious, as we know, and homemade roti. I mean, even the roti, is not filled with a bunch of words that you can't pronounce. It's made from scratch on the floor of this hut with one kerosene burner.
Wow.
And of course, here in the US, the biggest consumers of junk food are generally poorer people because it's cheap and convenient. But in India, where I was, a medium Domino's pizza was $13.
Wow.
And this girl, whose name is Anshal, her father would have to work, I think, 3 days to buy one Domino's pizza.
Amazing.
So,
Wow. So yet he was able to feed his family a very healthy meals under $5 a day with
right,
his income. Wow.
right, right.
I had a similar experience. I went to Uganda for a mission trip as a physician, and we ate everything that they could grow. And
Uh-huh.
that was so amazing for 2 weeks, and there was no refrigeration, there was no electricity, there's no
That's
running
interesting.
water.
Yeah, that's almost in a certain way. There's a silver lining to having no refrigeration, because you
Right.
can only eat what's available right then, as opposed to filling your freezer with a bunch of packaged foods that are filled with junk.
Right, exactly. I will say though, I did bring in some barbecue sauce, and we made a jackfruit pulled kind of a
Oh, did you
meaty
like a pulled
sandwich.
pork kind of with
They
jackfruit?
loved it.
Oh, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
They'd never had the barbecue sauce. So I'm bringing my little processed food over to them.
Oh,
But
yeah,
that was,
yeah.
go ahead.
That's interesting. Are you familiar with the Cambridge study that was done?
No.
Okay. Well, Cambridge University conducted an exhaustive study where they ranked diets around the world from least to most nutritional.
Mm,
And nine of the 10 healthiest countries are in Africa.
absolutely.
And, at first thought, you're kind of surprised. Well, wait, again, these are among some of the poorest countries in the world, and yet they have the most nutritional diets. Why is that? Well, when you look at what they're eating, it makes sense. I mean, fish, fruit, vegetables, legumes, nuts, grains, seeds, and very little meat.
Hmm.
Meat is kind of used as seasoning, and almost no processed junk food.
Right, absolutely. It's interesting. So as you've come along and you're
Mhm.
photographing and you're seeing these amazing stories of each child in each country, and you're going to share these with us. What was your hope that what would be your hope for individuals who are looking at your book? Like
Okay.
what's the frame of
Well, for
mind?
me, photography is an exchange. It's a process
Mm-hmm.
of reflection, not only for the subject of the picture, but the viewer as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that extends, of course, not only um, to viewers like you, but to parents. And
Right.
the parents of the kids I photographed were often really surprised because they weren't fully cognizant of what their kids were eating.
Mm.
When I was shooting in India, I had a father standing over my shoulder looking at the pictures as they came up on my laptop while I was shooting. And he kind of shook his head and he said, "I cannot believe Advita is eating all that junk. I'm going to have a talk with her mother." You know? And I had remember a mother in Los Angeles, a single mom, who took one look at all the junk food in her daughter's diet and immediately blamed her ex-husband. And except for that bowl of broccoli, that was the night she was home with me. You know. So I have parents, who are blaming each other all
Mm,
over the world for,
right,
which,
right,
which, which tells me that the project is working
right.
because it's starting a conversation and it's
Exactly.
getting people to think more deeply about what they're eating.
As you were talking about that, exactly that thought came to me was it stimulated conversation because I know that's what it did in our household. And we're healthy eaters. All three of my children are grown now, and my
Huh.
husband and others, they're all very healthy eaters. But
Yeah.
that's because that process actually started about 8 years ago, and that when they were teenagers. Horrible
Mhm.
time to switch their diet, by the way.
Yeah.
And they were eating fairly well. But what
Mhm.
an interesting um, conversation, but it's a pauper's diet. I mean, that's what they call a healthiest diet is, we should be eating like paupers and not kings. And
Okay. Yeah. Uh-huh.
yeah,
I
that's
like that. I
exact.
have to borrow that. Paupers.
Borrow, please, because I'm going to be borrowing a few of your quotes that I've read. So,
Okay.
I really,
Yeah.
the one in particular that I really enjoy, besides the connective tissue of family and culture, excuse me, is slow food never replaced by junk food.
Okay.
And
Right.
that's what we were in search of. And I thought that was so telling. And um, when you look at what you describe as slow food, you
Mhm.
mentioned everything here. Did that change your perspective? Because you said you're a parent and you had a child a similar
Well,
age.
we're like you are we're pretty healthy eaters. But even my wife and I were a little surprised when we saw Hank's food, and
Mm.
we thought to ourselves, well, wasn't there at least another bowl of pea soup in there? More green. And that was another kind of thing that I was kind of shocked by when I did this project. Is just the sheer dearth of vegetables and what most kids are eating around the world.
Wow.
And having done some research, I was really shocked to find that only 1% of our calories come from vegetables in the U.S.
Yeah, and a lot of those are French fries and different things. I mean,
Right, right.
the problem is so vast, with
Mhm.
school lunches and what
Yeah.
we're buying our children and subsidies, and
Oh, I
it's
know.
overwhelming. Did you find now that when people are asking you about your project, do you give them any advice? I
Well,
mean,
yes, I mean, I try to, and I always try to direct the project to kids and hope that kids are looking at the pictures. And I
yeah,
ask them real simple questions like, well, how many of the foods you're eating come from the farm or from a garden? And how many of the foods you're eating are processed packaged foods?
hmm.
And of the processed packaged foods, how many ingredients are in the foods?
Oh, that's very
And
good.
and yeah, and how many of those ingredients can you pronounce? And I always say if try to avoid foods that have more than 5 ingredients, and especially avoid foods that have ingredients you can't pronounce.
Absolutely.
Those are, and one simple rule of thumb is don't eat any food that has a commercial, which is maybe not going to get me any corporate sponsorship.
What,
But
big broccoli doesn't have a commercial?
yeah, and then that's another thing I ask is how many colors are in your food, and that's a
Hmm.
good exercise for little kids. I mean, it's
Yes.
fun, it's interactive, it's engaging, and I say if your foods are all white, yellow, brown, then you're not getting enough nutrient. So
Absolutely.
you should have a rainbow of colors in your foods.
Eat the rainbow. I've said that so many times. I'd probably be
Uh-huh.
a millionaire by now.
Uh-huh.
um, it's interesting. I wrote a handout too on helping parents because I think, like you said, we've basically outsourced. I consider it we've been hijacked, right? So they hijacked our taste buds and then we are
Mhm.
drawn to who's ever producing these foods. And we don't teach kids how to cook anymore. And we're not in the kitchen. So that was one of my focuses is, one, make it fun, but also teaching parents, like you got to get in the kitchen with the kids. And yes, it's time consuming, but it's so worth it. If you look at the
Uh-huh.
long drawn out effects in chronic disease and
Yeah.
80% of it could be actually avoided. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I
as
think
far, go
yeah, go
ahead.
ahead. No, no,
No,
go
no, please. Please go ahead.
No, I just had a thought and I kind of went in and out of my mind. But what were you just saying about go back one little?
Yeah, the 80% of the
Mhm.
chronic disease could be avoided. And so it was
Right.
really important for me to help because I think kids are almost pushed aside and because they're not,
Mhm.
like adults who have
Right. Right.
diabetes or chronic
Yeah.
disease.
And I think, often if you give kids the choice from a young age, they're going to choose, salt, fat, and sugar over leafy greens because salt, fat, and sugar go back to, you know, our deepest primal cravings, right? That go back to the caveman days.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you don't introduce the whipped cream frappuccinos at age 8, right, then
Right.
you know, a little sautéed spinach with salt and butter isn't so bad.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. You know, I remember I had one patient who came in as a 2-year-old well visit, and the little one was eating Cheetos and mom was letting them sip their Dr. Pepper. And I was just like,
Wow. Yeah.
first of all, you shouldn't be eating that, but bringing it to the doctors, there's just it's so normal and accepted. So
Right.
it's the cultural shift in the belief system we have to change. Do
Yeah.
you have, speaking of healthy, I always like to
Mhm.
talk about recipes. Do you have a favorite meal that you and your family like that you like to share that maybe our
Um,
audience would like to
well,
look into?
we eat all kinds of foods, and my wife is a really great cook, and she makes Indian food and, you know,
Mm,
foods from all over the world. And my son is into making his own lunch, and he makes soba noodles and so
nice.
forth, and his own little bento boxes.
Nice.
We
Very
have
good.
an international diet, but for me personally, when it's lunchtime, I go in and just throw whatever I find into a bowl and mix it together as salad. It's just like, you know, whether it's black-eyed peas and you know, some avocado and tomato and cucumber, and
Hmm.
make my own dressing. You know,
Yeah.
it's satisfying to just do it yourself as opposed to relying on someone else to feed you.
Absolutely. It's almost like a Buddha bowl. It's
Is that,
easy
oh yeah,
for
okay, yeah. I'd love to
families
get
to
your
pull it together.
suggestions too, because
Yeah.
I'm actually doing a launch for the book in New York at Powerhouse Books next week, and then I'm doing a talk at Princeton the week after. So,
Wonderful.
and there are always questions afterwards, so I like to have as much ammunition.
Oh, well, I
After.
can give you everything you could possibly need.
Okay, that's great. No, I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We just had two of my partners that we created the Healthy Human Revolution. Anthony lost 160 pounds and has kept it off for about 13 years now. And Jason is also a photographer, by the way, lost 120 pounds and just did the Leadville 100. It's a 100-mile race over the highest
And these
elevation
are
of city in the
patients of
U.S.
yours?
No, these were friends that I met 3 years ago. And we really felt compelled to bring more stories and resources to people to help them change. And we just had our first conference last
Mhm.
weekend. So
Oh,
it was really fun to help people transition, because I can tell you what to eat as a doctor. It's like, eat your fruits and vegetables, but how to
yeah.
do it, that's the key in sustaining it. So, because I'm not getting the 9 and 10-year-olds, I'm getting the 6-year-olds with type 2 diabetes and hypertension and heart disease.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we
You hear
needed,
about that boy in England who went blind from,
no.
yeah, it was just on the news, all over the news.
Oh,
An
wow.
English teenager was eating only French fries, Pringles, white bread. I mean, he just wouldn't eat. He didn't like the textures of other foods. And he lost his sight. He literally lost his vision.
Oh my goodness.
Not getting any nutrient or vitamin in his diet at all.
Oh my goodness. I can't imagine. I will definitely be looking that up. I wonder if that's, wow. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. I
Not to
don't
bum you out, but you know, that's
know. Well, it's sad, right? Because I know when I was growing up, it was very rare to see, there was occasional children that were obese.
right.
But now you go to your kids and it's not uncommon to see, I think it's around 20% of Americans' children are overweight or obese now.
Yeah, yeah. And
And
I just read that 75% of adults are either overweight or obese.
yes, and a
So,
third of Americans are either pre-diabetic or diabetic.
yeah.
Most of them don't know it. Kidney disease is on the rise.
And you know, just watching the presidential debates last
Mm.
night, and there's all this discussion about, well, who's going to pay for healthcare? And to me, the question should be, why are we sick to begin with? And the answer is staring us in the face 3 times a day, right? Breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Yes, it's literally on the end of your fork. And that's when I start this conversation with patients, is like, what's on the end of your fork can literally change your life. Like, you can reverse type 2 diabetes. I mean, and it happens quick when they do what I ask and I encourage them. It's amazing. And it's so much fun to see people, because I think chronic disease has become a cultural norm,
Yeah,
right? So we're used to not feeling well and sick. And if you're not taking a pill and you're in your 50s, you're like, what's wrong with you?
that's
but it can really radically change someone's life, and you can just have a reawakening. It's amazing to watch that happen in people's lives, and that's part of the motivation to do this type of thing and share people's work like you, because maybe there's something visually in that book that's going to really impact someone's life and allow them to, like, we really need to clean up our diet, and because that's just the start. And so it's so important, the work that you're doing, because I think it's the visual art. My youngest one is also a photographer, videographer. That's his major at
Is he
CU,
in
and
college?
he's a junior now.
Oh, okay. Where?
And at University of Colorado in Boulder.
Okay, studying photography.
Yeah, and film. And so it's really fun to see, young people getting involved and interested. And so they come from not only health, but also from the standpoint of environment. And they're thinking, what is my world going to be in 50, 60 years?
Yeah.
But it's a lot of, it's so important. And I think, people who use your visual talents are so very intriguing to talk to, because you think differently.
I'm trying to validate that old cliche that a picture is worth 1,000 words.
Oh my goodness, I would say so. Well, it's more than 1,000 words; it's 1,000 bytes, really. Because I mean, if your photos, there you go. I'm giving you all your bytes you need for the next week. But yeah, your book was really intriguing. They were so very colorful and vibrant, but you always think about, there was a little girl in Germany. She had from Hamburg, I believe, and she had Greta. Okay, perfect name for a German little girl. And she had the earphones on, and she's holding her doll, and she's slightly overweight. And it just rang to me as like, what else are these kiddos doing during the day? Are they being active? Is it the food making them tired? Did you talk to them about any other activities? Because I saw one was in a swimsuit. And
yeah, I tried to kind of give a little reflection of their interests, their hobbies, their character through the props that I included in the photographs. So yeah, so I had a boy in a swimsuit because he lives in Sicily and he's swimming all the time, and and I would choose fabrics to arrange the food on that also reflected the culture, as well. So in this case of the boy in the swimsuit, he's laying on a background that has sea motifs, seashells and fish and so forth.
Yeah, and you had the little turtle or octopus maybe of little stuffed. It was cute. So now so you hear about the parents and they're blaming each other and starting conversations. What about the kids? I mean, were they looking at this and going, "Wow"?
I think I mean, I had kids who were surprised by seeing all the food. He goes, did I eat that? And I don't remember. Well, it's in your journal. It's, But I had an older boy named Isaiah from Los Angeles who I think was really struck by seeing all the food. And he realized that a lot of his weight problem was a result of all the in-between snacking that he was doing. So he vowed to eliminate all the snacks from his diet. So
that's a good point, because everywhere we go, it's like, oh, they're hungry, feed them at school, feed them when they get a good grade, you give them a candy, or if they're at soccer, they need more of a snack. I'm like, actually, I think they'll be okay. Just make sure they're well hydrated.
No, that's true.
Yeah, I think you're right. The culture is, it's scary. Because once someone's diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, it's about 10 years of their lifespan has been reduced. And so yeah. And now our kids are getting type 2 diabetes, it was unheard of 20 years ago.
Well, I know. And that's why I visited places like the United Arab Emirates, which is a country where diabetes virtually didn't exist, two generations ago. And now in the reading I did, I found that in 2016, there were over 800,000 cases of diabetes.
Unbelievable.
And that's just been in the span of a couple of generations.
Right, absolutely. It's just our diet has been exported around the world. And now everyone else is paying the price with us. So. Yeah. Wow. Was there one overarching thing that you would like to share with us, if someone who's maybe considering buying the book, because I know I lay it prominently in our living room. It's actually the only book out, because I really think it starts the conversations for people like me. It's so important around food. I think about it daily, how we can help people. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions that's coming from someone who was inspired to do this project to the reader, potential watching or looking?
Well, I'm hoping that the book becomes part of the library of schools and public libraries. think that that's a great context for talking about the pictures. And in fact, I did a residency at a school in Brooklyn this past spring, and I found that the pictures were a great medium for connecting a lot of different disciplines, from science and health and journalism and photography and art, and sociology. This is a
Wow.
K through 12 school, so we were able to use the pictures in many different class levels. And in
Awesome.
fact, just this morning, the coordinator who brought me in sent me a text showing me a photograph from a class where students were using my pictures. These were the garbage pictures I did, but they were doing an anthropological analysis of the elements, all the stuff that was in those photographs.
Oh,
So
wow.
anyway, I'm kind of going off track a little bit, but to me, yeah, schools are kind of an ideal context for looking at and discussing these pictures.
I mean, I think that would be a great, actually, just a class project, right? It's just
Uh-huh.
learning, actually, probably teach a whole class around the whole thing. Like you said, so many different elements that a science teacher could use, a home ec teacher, a health teacher, whomever.
Uh-huh.
Fascinating.
And the
That's
first
really,
thing that we would do is we would bring the class into the gallery where the pictures are shown, and they have large prints on the walls, and we would just say, all right, go stand next to the diet that is most like your own, just as an opening exercise. And kids would go look at all the pictures of the food, and they go, oh, I'm kind of like that one, but then I kind of like this one too. So they'd have a
oh,
little
wow.
two diets, and
Okay.
so
Well,
that.
that's really good too, because have you ever heard of have you seen the app called Ate It?
No, I haven't.
So it's a free app, and I use it a lot with people. So it's basically they just take pictures of their food. So
Oh,
because food journals can be very burdensome and
oh,
inaccurate,
uh-huh.
which I know you had mentioned in one of your.
An extension of what people do on Instagram anyways. They're always
Exactly. So they just take photos and it timestamps it and puts a date on it, and it'll tell you the time between. And that's been really helpful because people are always surprised, like you said, the snacking, what the
Hmm,
consumption of the amount of food or lack thereof.
right.
So that's been really a very helpful tool. So if you go into another project like that, might just be a helpful tool, something like that.
I
But
just was at a conference in Sweden earlier in the summer called Eat Stockholm.
hmm,
And people from all over the world come to share ideas about diet, nutrition, and the future of food. And there was a young guy who developed an app that allows you to scan your grocery receipt, and it will tell you what your carbon footprint is based on the foods that you're eating, which I thought was, just remarkable.
that is really good. Is that available now?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry that I don't have on the tip of my tongue the name of that app, but
No, I can look for it for sure. And do you know Marco Borges, who that is?
I don't.
So Marco Borges is he started 22 Days Nutrition, but he was a personal trainer for Beyonce.
Okay.
And he's a friend of mine, and he wrote a book just recently called Green Print. So
Okay.
he's talking about in his book, how eating a diet, one that's healthy,
Uh-huh.
is more plant-based, right? And one that is also easy on the, your carbon footprint and really
Sure.
helps, with that direction. So his audience is trying to get these young people, my kids and your kids' ages, to really pay attention in whatever levers we need to pull to help them make better choices for themselves and the earth. So it's a really cool book. It's
I'll look for that.
Green Print. Yeah,
Green print.
absolutely.
Okay.
It's a great name.
Yeah, it is.
But yeah, absolutely. Is there any last words of advice you'd like to give us before we close? Because I know I went over a little bit of the time we had.
That's okay. I think we covered quite a bit. I
Okay,
think I'm happy with what we've discussed. So
awesome. Well, I sure appreciate your time. And I think it's just such a unique project. And it was just, there's so, your imagination just goes wild. And I just really, really
good.
hope
I'm so
people will
glad
buy
to hear you. Glad to hear that
this.
it resonated, Laurie.
Absolutely. So we'll definitely share this, and I'll have it up hopefully by the end of the weekend. And everyone, please check out his book and leave an Amazon review because you're going to love it. And
Okay.
thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. See ya.